and the other one was...
So you were on this early.
Oh, well, this issue actually began in the 60s.
Right.
And it was clear there was a lot of hunting around for some environmental issue that would give people power on the over the energy sector. And so, you had Earth Day in the early 60s, but then you had global cooling. And the villain there was...
That was the 70s.
Yeah. Well, it was 60s, and whatever it is, started increasing the 70s. So they said, well, this won't go. And for a number of reasons, CO2 came into the issue. One of the reasons was the International Geophysical Year
known as Dr. Richard Sigmund Lindzen. He is an American astronomic physicist known for his work in the dynamics of the middle atmosphere, atmospheric tides, and ozone photochemistry. He has published more than 200 scientific papers and books. I think he's also an emeritus professor at MIT. Yes. And he says here, yes, the same thing we're saying. So, and ironically enough, he was, if that's the best figure of speech, by the time he graduated from Harvard in 1961, that is undergraduate, Jordan wasn't even born. Jordan was born a year thereafter, even more than a year afterwards. So, I digress. So, amongst other things, he has two awards, I believe, or probably more. One is from the Fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. The other is the James B. Messuwain Medal. Okay, so he's just known for dynamic meteorology, atmospheric tides, ozone photochemistry, quasi-biennial oscillation, Eris for hypothesis. So as of May of 2010, he attended a conference, the Heartland Institute's International Conference on Climate Change. There he was saying that, I suggest that we stop accepting the term skeptic. As far as he can tell, skepticism involves doubts about a plausible proposition. Okay, he thinks current global warming alarm does not present a plausible proposition. Okay, for 20 years, and there was an applause there, for 20 years, more than 20 years, unfortunately, 22 by then, since 1988, of repetition, escalation of claims, does not make it plausible, does not make it more plausible. Quite the contrary. Okay, he would suggest the failure to prove the case of 20 years makes the case even less plausible. Okay, 20 years, and so this is now 20 years then. So if you add what we have right now, 13 years, so it's now 33 years. So 33, I would say 33 years makes the case even less plausible, as does the evidence of ClimateGate and other instances of what are essentially inaudible but sounds like overt cheating. In the meantime, as of then, while he avoided making forecasts for tenths of a degree change in global average temperature model, he's quite willing to state that unprecedented climate catastrophes are not on the horizon, though in several 100,000 years we may return to an ice age. Okay, so in this video there are a couple of things he mentioned there. One of it was that he believes probably 97% of scientists believe or accept that CO2 is a greenhouse gas, and it can create some warming, but not to the extent that it will lead to global Armageddon. So amongst the other things he mentioned is that this same narrative that the climate is determined by a greenhouse gases, or rather the climate is determined by greenhouse effect, and adding CO2 to it increases it, causes warming. Okay, the natural greenhouse substances, according to him, apart from CO2, are water vapor, clouds, upper level clouds. So these other substances will amplify the continued emissions of CO2. So this is the premise of the whole climate Armageddon. So according to him as well, the whole the scientific work done around this was peppered with errors, intentionally peppered with errors. And the plan for that, the reason for that, according to him, is with that sort of error, as you can imagine, if you have a lot of blunder in what you're saying and what you are presenting, your the panel you're facing, or whoever you're talking to, is going to face the errors you are, the obvious blunders you are blotting out, or you have probably presented. So according to him, that is why this whole narrative, the premise of their work hasn't been addressed, because the errors took away the attention of the people, the peer reviewers, and other stuff. So that is what he, amongst one of the main things he mentioned. And he also mentioned that the climate system has enough degrees of freedom to be relatively immune to large-scale perturbations. Climate systems don't have tipping points. It has feedbacks, but not runaway feedbacks. Okay, so he also mentioned that now this whole narrative about the climate being determined by greenhouse effects, including the natural substances, as I mentioned earlier, water vapor, clouds, upper level clouds, and other stuff, and then when you combine them with CO2, then it will be a catastrophe. So according to him, it goes against Chatelier's principle. You can see the Chatelier's principle is saying here that if an equilibrium, which is the climate, for instance, the climate is in an equilibrium, if it is disturbed by changing the conditions, assuming that the combination of the natural substances in the climate and CO2 and indeed other emissions, attempt to change the equilibrium that the climate is in, Chatelier is now saying this position of the position of equilibrium will shift to counteract the change to reestablish the equilibrium. So this is what he's trying to point out amongst the main things, that the people who are proposing and propounding this whole narrative have not been able to run their theory against the Chatelier's principle, and indeed a whole lot of other principles. So you'll find the link to this video in the description box below, and you can watch it and digest yourself. And he's also, amongst other things, he also mentioned that it is not even easy to, even with the supercomputers we have these days, to model the climate. According to, he says, yes, to model model even a centimeter of climate changes. It says here, supercomputers cannot resolve a centimeter of atmospheric motion, so they assume what the clouds does, amongst other things. So as I pointed out earlier on, you can find the link to this video in the description box below and digest it yourself. And thank you very much for watching this video.